Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
You're listening to Inside OUTA.
Welcome to Inside OUTA, our weekly podcast that gives insight into how we at OUTA promote civil activism and active citizenship by tackling conversations that hopefully will drive our democracy further. I'm your host, Akhona Ntuli, producer at OUTA, standing in for our lovely host, Benedict Bule. Today, we are in conversation with clinical psychologist Charity Mkone from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, where we'll be talking about depression and the role of civil society and government within the space. Welcome, Charity.
Thank you very much for having me.
So lovely to have you. So, Charity, I'm just going to jump into some research that obviously SADAG has been a part of. So, according to research that was put out, depression is actually affecting 9.7% of South African population. And this obviously will affect the economy negatively, and that's why we're bringing this conversation to the table. 1 in 4 employees will be affected by depression, and then further studies have found that 24% of young people in high school between grade 8 and grade 11 have experienced depression, hopelessness, and just 21% have actually attempted suicide at least once. So I'm just going to start off the conversation without even going anywhere and just ask you, are we in a place where depression has risen in terms of numbers, or are we just more prevalent to the information on it?
I think the figures and the numbers have always been there. And the stats that we do have at our disposal are from people who actually come out and seek treatment, and people who are identified by mental health practitioners as being depressed. But the figures and the numbers have been there and could be higher because of some people who are suffering in silence and people who are not coming out to say or even identify within themselves that they actually are depressed. And I think it unfortunately took the death of prominent figures in our society. So the death of Professor Moyosi by suicide, as well as WHP, which is a more recent one, to actually show us the red flags of how lethal, literally, that depression can be.
Yes, definitely. I like the word that you said, lethal. I would actually even go to say a silent lethal death that we're actually facing as a global society, I think. So before we go any further, I'm always of the opinion that people need to have like a definition of what actually is depression, because like a clinical understanding, what is depression? Other people think it's just having the blues for 2 days. Just having the blues for 2 days, or I'm sad, so I'm depressed. There's always this little instances where people might just say it, but what is actual depression?
So depression is classified as a mood disorder. It's under the broad umbrella of mental illness or mental health disorders. It is known as a mood disorder that disrupts one's mood most prominently. And the symptoms vary according to the severity of the depression. So we have mild to moderate depression and severe, or what we call clinical depression. So mild to moderate depression, or it was previously named dysthymia, or persistent depressive disorder, is the same symptoms as a clinical depression or more severe depression, but that's more long-standing and less severe. So by less severe, I mean that the person can have the symptoms of depression. So the sadness, the deep, overwhelming sadness, the hopelessness, changes in appetite, changes in weight, either weight gain or weight loss, but they can still function. Okay, so they can still are able to wake up in the morning, are able to hold up a job, but there's some signs of those symptoms in terms of them isolating themselves from social settings, no longer enjoying activities and things that they previously used to enjoy, not finding a lot of pleasure in life, and of course the sadness that they feel, but they're able to still look functional in terms
Hold
of their day-to-day.
Smile, greet people, but inside when you get home, obviously there's a different conversation altogether.
Most definitely.
Okay, cool.
And severe or clinical depression is one that warrants admission So that is characterized by the person not grooming anymore, the person being quite neurovegetative. So we call it neurovegetative in terms of them not being active, so not being able to get out of bed in the morning, not being able to do anything. So those people it would warrant for them to get a hospitalization, or if the person is suicidal and has a plan. So someone has suicidal thoughts and has a clear plan of how they're going to do it and commit the suicide. Those are the two situations where hospitalization for depression is necessary.
Okay, so you just distinguish between, I would say, maybe acute and obviously severe depression. And I find that a lot of people are not aware when they actually have acute depression. Is there telltales of, because obviously we come from different societies, we have different backgrounds, different things will mean different things for people, but are there like an umbrella of 2 or 3 or 4 behaviors within yourself that you could maybe distinguish? And then say hopelessness. What does hopelessness look like in an everyday setting of your life? I mean, sadness, obviously, you wake up, you have this heaviness and all that, but things that red flags for yourself in terms of obviously the severe one is quite evident. If you're not washing for 3 days, if you're not eating, or if you don't want to see people, you're crying all the time and all these other things, you can't function. But I think it's the functional depressed people that are actually the ones who shock a lot of people when they decide to eventually go commit suicide. So what are the red flags in behavior that you would say someone must be aware of, like when you're affected?
I mean, the way in which I always describe it is that having depression or living with depression is like seeing life through dark colored glasses. Okay, so it's like the glasses are painted in black, and it's very difficult to see perspective, any type of perspective. So with the more acute or persistent kind of depressive disorders, the person sees every circumstance and everything that's going on around them as it's like seeing the glass half empty in all situations. Okay, so what distinguishes between having a bad day or being sad or having feelings of depression versus a depressive disorder or depressive episode is that even if whatever difficult or bad situation passes, the person still feels very hopeless. They still feel like there's no way out. Okay, so even if something is not as bad, what happens with depression is that everything that you perceive seems negative. So, for example, if you if you are working and you're passed for a promotion, what you internalize is that I'm no good and nothing good will ever come of me, and you can't even draw back on past experiences or past triumphs that you've had. So someone who does struggle with depression would see that as the ultimate end of their life and won't be able to be logical in terms of
there's no way to
things.
see the silver lining in any situation when you're depressed. So someone could say, it's okay, maybe you're missing this promotion because a bigger one is coming, and the person won't see that there's no hope, basically.
Certainly.
Yeah, okay.
Certainly.
So that's quite interesting. So I'm just going to go in and ask about, in terms of, we spoke about 1 in 4 employees are actually depressed. What is it that companies can or should be doing in terms of that? Because if people are not productive, one of the signs, the signs or the effects or symptoms, being the word, of depression is the non-productivity, which obviously will affect the turnover of the company and and so forth and so forth. So what can companies be doing, or what should they be doing when it comes to depression and the employees that they have? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the first thing is to really treat depression as any other illness. So if someone would come into the workplace and say, I have tuberculosis, for instance, you would treat it as a priority, that this person needs to get treatment and they need to get well. And you would find merit in that. And I think the first thing is to change the mindsets around the stigma and the mindsets around people thinking that mental illnesses or depression is something that someone can snap out of. And I think that's the starting point, to see it as an illness and treat it as an illness. Okay. And the second part is then to have awareness days. So the more people know about depression, the the better it is for them to pick it up if they are struggling with depression or having struggles with depression, and it would be easier for them to do something to get help or to try and find assistance. And I think to really monitor the mood of the employees or people that are working there, and to check if you feel that someone has changed drastically within the past however months, and it's quite a stressful period, to really check up on them and see.
Check up on them and check how they're doing. So like almost like an emotional well-being check-ins that the company should be doing.
Yes.
Well, here at OUTA we are doing that. So let me just brag a little bit. Just to hold the conversation there, I want to come back and we speak about the stigma around depression. We're just going to take a little break and let the people enjoy some music, and we'll be back and just talk about the stigma and what do we do about this, how do we further drive this conversation. So this is Inside OUTA, and we are sitting with Charity. We'll be back soon.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. brandlive.co.za.
Less corruption, more accountability. Stay tuned to Inside OUTA.
You're still with Inside OUTA. You're speaking to Akhona, the producer. I have Charity Mkone, a clinical psychologist from SADAG, talking to us about depression and how we as a civil society can start, being more aware, being more educated, and actually being more self-aware of ourselves if we might have depression or not. So, Charity, before we took a break, you spoke about the stigma. I just want to go back to that, because I believe that the reason why it took the professor, it took Double HP for us to be having these very big conversations now, is that people have a misconception. I found myself with the professor going, but he was a professor, and then it dawned on me that that's one of the stigmas. The stigma is that, you when you look a certain way, when your life is a certain way, then automatically you're happy. So I just want to talk around that. Where do you think the stigma actually really stems from, and how do we destigmatize it? Because at the end of the day, we're here and a lot of people are depressed, and we have to actually address the issues.
I think it's very difficult because of the main symptom of depression, which is sadness. That someone who is struggling or suffering from depression feels sad, and overwhelming sadness that doesn't seem to have a root. So you can't point to what this person is sad about. And therefore, people who are famous and people who are well-known, people who from the outside look like they have it all together and they should be the happiest people because they have everything else that everyone else wants, feel as though their sadness or the symptom of depression, which is the sadness, is unwarranted. And it becomes very difficult to feel as though it's something that's legitimate, that's going on.
So it goes back to something you being ungrateful.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and a lot of narratives around that particularly for someone who's had it bad and now their life has relative privilege. So with the example of Professor Mayosi, there was talks around how the Fees Must Fall movement contributed to how he felt and his depression. And I mean, there may be some of those things that are happening, some parallels, but I think it was a real illness. And I think even societies or the reports around it, being very careful to absolve depression as a cause of his suicide. That it couldn't be that someone as smart as him, someone as established as him, could have this illness. And it's very important to realize that it doesn't discriminate. And what leads to suicide in most cases, and what I've seen even from my experience in other case studies, is that people who seem to have it all together externally are the ones who are more likely to commit suicide, because they feel like even with their best efforts, even with things that should be making them happy and should be making them okay with their lives, it's not helping. Forgetting that it is an illness, and if an illness is not treated, it persists on, and unfortunately with depression, it ends and leads to suicide.
I actually enjoy what you just said about that, the whole process of once you have a picture of your life and what it's supposed to look like, and then you still are sad, and then it's just like this level of disassociation almost. Like, how can I be sad and still look like I've got everything? So I really I enjoy what you just said there, because my next question is, how does civil society become more sensitive and educated to this? Like, is it a matter of have we become less compassionate as people? Do we need to become more sincere? Like, what is it that we need to know? Okay, besides the educational part is important. Read up on it, know what it is. But how does people become more sensitive to it? Is it just an educational thing, or?
I think undoing and unlearning certain narratives as well that we carry as a nation, some social constructs. So there's big things around, for instance, the strong black woman.
Nice.
That if you're a black woman, you have to be strong and you have to withstand a lot of things, and that you actually can.
Mbogodo
And
syndrome.
I think, yes, and I think things like that cause people to really suffer in silence, because when you see the social narrative, the social cultural way of being, and the things that are happening around you, then it feels very shaming to the person who is struggling with the depression to see it as an illness, because it's seen as an excuse. And there are other things around, men don't cry and men should be strong. So I think narratives and things like that really bring shame. So over and above the stigma, the person who is struggling with this and a person who does have depression sees it as extremely shameful because of the dominant narrative and what they feel they ought to be and ought to be behaving. So it's very difficult for them to even see some of the symptoms as symptoms of an illness. And some people see it as an excuse, as something that they're just making up, and something that they just ought to snap out of. And it's quite chilling how many people do think that you can just snap out of it.
Oh yeah, no. And it's funny enough that you said that, is that a lot of people find it difficult to we come from a society, especially different, obviously, backgrounds. There's a thing of, we, especially, let me just say, black communities, there's a big thing around parents or guardians always looking at you and saying, you have it much better. So almost like changing that narrative of, just because you have it much better does not mean that depression is an illness that will find you. So those kind of narratives, because I'm just thinking, like, a lot of people will say it's difficult to speak to their parents about depression, because they'll be like, you're being lazy, you're being you're being a child, I had it much worse, and all that. So it's just about changing our language as well, I guess, around what struggle is,
Most
definitely. It's gonna, because also where I wanted to go actually was, different backgrounds obviously affect different people. Am I reaching, or is it just one size fits all?
No, it's not. So it's the symptoms are present in very different ways. So for instance, men would present very differently to women because of course of social constructions. Okay, so for a man, it's more acceptable for him to have outbursts of anger and for him to be angry and to smash and bang things around. And for women, it's more acceptable socially for her to cry. But the root symptom and the root feeling and emotion that underlies all of that is the sadness. For instance, if someone is depressed or someone is struggling with depression. So the presentation would most certainly be different, and the person, it would be in accordance to what is allowed or in accordance to what is prevalent in that culture. And therefore, it takes a mental health practitioner and someone who is qualified and someone who can make that diagnosis. So, for instance, if someone is irritable, so it's not something that's spelled out if you look at the textbook in depression as one of the symptoms, but it is a follow-on. So I'll give an example. So if someone, because a major symptom of depression is sleep. So most people are very sleep deprived because they ruminate on certain things that happened. And what happens is, if you sleep deprived, you're quite irritable. Okay, so if someone is constantly irritable all the time, it is a follow-on from a symptom of depression, but it's showing up as
it's manifesting as irritability. So there's various ways in which depression will manifest. So people must not look at just one pair of symptoms. They must always be searching within themselves about where something is coming from. Because I'm realizing that someone actually tweeted the other day that at some point we're going to have to realize that we're all self-medicating with alcohol.
Most
And
definitely.
I thought whatever, because you go home, you have a glass of wine and you go to bed. But someone said eventually you must realize that you end up having 4 glasses of wine and every day. That's not a normal thing, but
Yes.
each to their own. I'm not saying that anyone should stop what they're doing, but I'm just saying that look at your behavior.
Yes.
I was actually even saying to you earlier is that I didn't realize my own smoke screens as a person that battled with depression, is that once I didn't wash the dishes or didn't make my bed, those were my early detectors. So are there any flags that, as me sitting at home listening to this podcast, must try to maybe look out for, like in a broader sense, like on both sexes now, for men and women? Is there anything that is glaringly like, if this kind of behavior is starting there, just maybe go see someone and seek some help? Can you just give us a list of some of that?
All right. So I have a mnemonic that I usually teach to people to remember depression. It's SIGME-CAPS. So it's SIGME-CAPS. All right.
Say that again.
So SIGME-CAPS. The S is for sleep. So any changes in sleep pattern. Either you don't sleep enough or you oversleep. And then the I is interest. So if you lose interest in things that you used to bring you pleasure before. And then the G is guilt. So feeling guilt and shame because of feeling sad and oversleeping. The M is memory loss. Okay, so memory loss, you can't seem to remember things. The E is energy. So decreased levels of energy, you don't have energy to do anything. C is concentration, so loss of concentration. The A is appetite, so either overeating or undereating, any changes in appetite. The P is pleasure, so not being able to experience any pleasure in things that previously did bring you pleasure. And S, which is a big one, is thoughts of suicide. Okay, so any of those 5 that you feel are happening or that you notice that happen and persist uninterrupted for a period of 2 weeks warrant intervention from a mental health practitioner. And I think that's very important.
It's very nice.
And also another big thing is social isolation. So if you know yourself to be someone who's outgoing and you feel energized by being with other people, when you intentionally or even unintentionally, I think for a lot of people, they don't even see it happening. Feel like being at home by yourself is much better than going out there and socializing with people, feeling like no one really will understand how you feel. It's all part of those symptoms, the feelings of guilt, the feelings of shame for how you feel. And to understand that the sadness that someone feels when they're depressed is quite overwhelming. So it's all consuming in that they can't seem to feel anything else except a deep, overwhelming sadness that overtakes them. And it's very difficult to get over that.
Okay. I really like your acronym. That it's so powerful for me. So I'm just going to ask for you to just give it so we can put it as a caption for the podcast as well. So we're gonna wrap the conversation up. We unfortunately have a lot to talk about, just not enough time. Can I just give us a very short where people go, SADAG information, just so that after this conversation, if you now did the acronym and you realize, oh, I am actually depressed, where can I go?
Okay, so the telephone number for the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, the 24-hour helpline is 0800 121314. It's a 24-hour helpline, and there are trained counselors who will be able to assist you with whatever it is that you need.
Okay. Thank you so much, Charity. I really enjoyed that conversation. It actually gave me some self-awareness. That acronym that you use is a very, very good model. I think everybody should actually look at it. I think they'll find that they do need to seek some help. But any parting words for people that are listening? Anything that you'd like to say? Where can they find you if they want to contact you? That sort of thing.
All right. So I think the biggest thing and my biggest advocacy is that depression is a real illness. And it's not something that we are in the dark about in terms of treatment and how people can get better. So it is an illness that warrants treatment and that can be treated. It's 100% treatable and people can get help. And I'm based in Johannesburg, and you can contact SADAG in order to get my details. But there are also other trained, really great psychologists who are in the network with SADAG that would be able to assist if someone needs the assistance.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Join us next week as we talk about the role of media in further driving our democratic conversations. This is Akhona at OUTA. Your host, Benedetta, will be back next week, continuing the conversation.
Demand good governance. Join us weekly on Inside OUTA. Thanks for listening to Inside OUTA. Tune in next week when we delve deeper into undoing tax abuse.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. brandlive.co.za